All right, so we are live on Facebook again. I'm Connor Groel, and welcome to the Top Level Sports NFL Talk Show. Last week I was saying that I was going to come up with a name for the show, so this week I am testing out Direct Snap. So let me know how you feel about that. As always, I'll give people a minute or two to join the live stream on Facebook, but excited to bring this Week 2 NFL show to you guys here tonight. I'll probably repeat this in a minute, but once again, as you can see on our title slide, we have this week's show. First, we're going to start out with some top stories around the NFL this week before going into the Week 2 power rankings and checking out my best and worst predictions from Week 1 and closing out the show with my NFL game predictions for Week 2, breaking down all 16 matchups. You should be able to see them on the left and the right side of the screen. Made them a little bigger this week. Hopefully that increases visibility. Last week, I know there were a few issues with it being a little blurry on the sides there, but we'll test it out this week and see if it's any better. Just again, giving people a little time to join the show. I'm doing great. Had a lot of fun putting this one together, and I think it will be a lot of fun tonight. And of course, Top Level Sports. This is the Top Level Sports NFL Talk Show, and you can follow Top Level Sports as you see on this bottom panel on Facebook at Top Level Sports, Twitter at Top Level Sports. Of course, I'm Connor Groel, and you can find me on Twitter at Connor Groel. And check out all Top Level Sports has to offer on the full website, toplevelsports.net. But with that, I'm going to get going with today's show. So first off, once again, as I said, top stories in the NFL this week. It was a fun opening start, a bit of a chaotic start to the season, especially in that Thursday night game. The Falcons and the Eagles kicking it off, the Eagles squeezing out a win to start off their Super Bowl repeat campaign on a positive note, getting that win over Atlanta. And then over all the NFL this week, we had a lot of crazy things going on. Ryan Fitzpatrick might be the best quarterback in the league after 1 week. We're going to talk more about that, talk about all kinds of things that were happening in the league this week. Injuries, Scorigami. I'll explain what that is coming up in a little bit, and just breaking it all down and seeing, how this changes what I thought about these teams at the beginning of the season after 1 week. How much stock am I going to put into these Week 1 games, especially with a lot of the special circumstances that some of these teams face. But we are going to get straight into it with our first of our top stories. And we're going to be talking about a team, the Cowboys say they're America's team, but I think this team is becoming a close second. Everybody's got their favorite team, but I think growing as a second favorite team, partially out of comedic effect, lovable losers, the Cleveland Browns. Yep, I see Bill Kate on the show. Thanks for tuning in. So the Cleveland Browns, of course, 1-31 over their last 2 seasons, but Hugh Jackson still gets to keep the job now in year 3. Well, they didn't lose, but they didn't win either. Kind of funny. Browns snapped their 17-game losing streak, but still have not found their way back into the win column for the first time since Week 16 of 2016 against the Chargers. This week, tying the Pittsburgh Steelers 21-21 in a ridiculous overtime game. The Steelers led 21-7 into the fourth quarter, but a lot of turnovers in this game from the Steelers. 6 even turnovers, 3 picks from Big Ben. Definitely not looking like his usual self. And of course, the storyline in that game was Le'Veon Bell. His holdout continues. I talked about this last week. And so starting at running back this week for the Steelers was James Conner, and he had himself actually a pretty great game for his first career start. 31 carries for $135 and 2 scores, as well as 57 yards receiving. So a great game from him. But the Steelers offense, it was a bit out of sorts. They still racked up nearly 500 total yards. But again, all those turnovers really stole the game away from them, but the Browns couldn't capitalize. Now, both of these teams had chances in the last few minutes of overtime to kick field goals, which would have won the game. Steelers missing theirs first. The Browns getting the ball back with a couple minutes left. They couldn't capitalize, had to punt. Then the Steelers get the ball back, with about a minute left to try to make something happen. Immediately throw an interception. Browns return it back to about the 10 or 15-yard line. An illegal block in the back on the return sends it back to about the 30. And then the Browns end up with a field goal on that possession, and that misses as well. So both teams blowing chances. Obviously, weather did play a big role in that, but both teams blowing chances. And for such a chaotic game, it kind of feels right for a tie. I don't think either team really deserved to win that one. But we have some crazy stats from the Browns. Obviously, 1-31 the last 2 seasons, already with half a win. So matching, I like to say, their average win total from the past 2 seasons. Kind of a joke. Also, a great tweet I saw from Bill Barnwell. Since the Browns returned to the NFL, teams with a turnover differential of 5 or better in a game are 132, 4-1. And of that, the Browns have played in 5 of those such games and are 2-1. So with a turnover differential, again, causing 5 or more turnovers than the other team, the rest of the NFL over this stretch of about 20 years or so, 132-2, the Browns just 2-1. So they will continue to be the lovable losers until they get in the win column. A tie is better than nothing. But this is a game I think they had a good opportunity to take this one. It was going to be close, and it was close. End up in the tie. So moving on to our next story, 7 new head coaches in the NFL this season. And not a great start for them, a nightmare, in fact. The worst week 1 for new head coaches in NFL history, a collective 0-7. And that really has to hurt. Skip forward a few. But yeah, 0-7, so you can see the list here. Vrabel for the Titans loses to the Dolphins. That was a pretty crazy game. I'm going to talk about that a little later as well. Pat Shurmur, my Giants, losing to the Jaguars in a tough one. Had a chance with maybe a minute and change left to go on a game-winning drive, but muffed the punt and gave it right back to Jacksonville, and that was that. Colts, again, another team in the last couple minutes with a chance to win against the Bengals. Andrew Luck trailing 27-23, needing a touchdown, completes the ball to Jack Doyle at around the 20-yard line. Again, we have less than a minute left in this one. And the ball is fumbled, returned, scoop and score all the way for a touchdown. Bengals wrap that one up 34-23. Cardinals looking bad. Bears with a big lead over Aaron Rodgers and losing that one, allowing 3 touchdowns in the fourth quarter. And then Matt Patricia and John Gruden, Lions and Rams. Real bad games for the both of them. So obviously one game, not a lot. You don't really want to judge a team based off of one game, as I see Brian joins the show. Be interested to see your takes on some of this stuff. Earlier we were just talking about the Browns. That's all you missed. Now talking about these head coaches. Obviously, you can't really judge a coach based off of one game. Mike Vrabel in particular had horrific luck. 2 rain delays. That game took about 7 hours to play, which is the longest game in NFL history from start to finish, I believe. And not only did his team have to fight through 2 rain delays on the road, also suffered tons of injuries. Marcus Mariota went down in that game. So the game was finished by Matt Castle. It might have been the old Jacksonville quarterback. If you know who I'm talking about, please write that in the comments. But backup quarterback finishing that game. Also injuries, Taylor Lewan, their offensive lineman stud, had a concussion in this game. And Delaney Walker, tight end, reliable, one of the most reliable tight ends over the last decade in the NFL, went out with a season-ending injury. So a really tough start for him. I think it's a mixed bag for these coaches. Titans got really unlucky with conditions and injuries. I'm still not sure what I feel about that team. I put them in the top half of the power rankings before the season started. They're definitely not there anymore. You'll have to wait till a little later to see where they end up. I think teams that really performed poorly, the Cardinals, the Lions, the Raiders, actually saw a lot of good things from Matt Nagy and those Bears. Obviously blowing the big lead, but to blow a big lead, you first have to get a big lead. And that was a big lead they picked up in Green Bay at Lambeau Field against the Packers. So a lot to be proud of there in that defeat. And the Giants, we saw flashes. We saw flashes of Saquon Barkley. We saw a defense hold up pretty well. There was one pick six in there, so only allowing 13 points to the Jaguars. So a tough start for these head coaches. We'll see, as the season progresses, how they're able to come back from these poor starts. It's definitely going to be something to keep watching as the season goes on. Continuing now, injury report, getting into some of those big names that went down in the season opener. And it's always so heartbreaking to see some of these players go out in just week one. You wait a whole season, you wait a whole off season for this. Just, a few plays later and it's all over for these players. Very unlucky, especially Greg Olsen, who missed, most of last season with a fractured foot. And this same injury, this time, same foot. So he is unlikely. He is hoping to return at some point in this regular season. I wouldn't necessarily bet on it, but super unfortunate as Cam Newton loses what's been his favorite target for practically his entire career. Keanu Neal, we saw go out for Atlanta in that season opener. Atlanta only getting weaker in the secondary, which is going to be one of their big problems. I already talked about Delaney Walker. Houston losing Shantrell Henderson, one of their offensive linemen. Those guys, those top four on the list, all out for the season. So real tough for them. But also some other injuries that we're going to be monitoring for week 2. Mariota, I said, left the game against the Titans. He did practice today. He's considered probable unless something unforeseen happens. You might be seeing these glitches. I don't really know what's going on. It just kind of happens. So we're going to have to work through that. But also a couple more quarterbacks, Aaron Rodgers, Ben Roethlisberger, both, again, sustained injuries. And a lot of quarterbacks got banged up in that week 1. Matthew Stafford as well comes to mind, just getting hit from all angles. Carson Wentz still won't be ready to return from last season, so Nick Foles will be at the helm again for the Eagles for week 2. Rodgers and Roethlisberger, also Leonard Fournette of the Jaguars, who did leave in the middle of that Giants game. They're all questionable. So obviously huge impact players, running or at least the focal point of their offenses. So we will have to see. Being put on IR is done for the season. I believe so. I'm not sure what the specifics are. I guess Greg Olsen may not have been put on the IR. I'd have to look into that. But I know he has said he wants to return for the season. So, I would assume there's a way he can do that. I'd have to check that. As we move on, Scorigami. I love talking about Scorigami. So if you have no idea what Scorigami is, and that would be most people, this is an idea that was created by John Boyes, sports writer for SB Nation, one of my favorite sports writers and one of my favorite people on the internet. He's a must follow, in my opinion. Creates a bunch of great series on SB Nation on the YouTube channel. He's got the Chart Party, 17-7-76. His sci-fi football, you'd have to read it, crazy story, all kinds of fun things from John Boyes. So one of his chart parties was Scorigami, which is basically the art of creating unique NFL final scores that have never happened before. So this is always a fun thing to kind of watch during the season. Usually we get a couple of these a year, a score that's never happened in the NFL. And right here in week 1, we got one. Saints-Bucks 48-40. That's an NFL first Scorigami. It was a great week for Scorigami if you were paying attention. We had almost a second Scorigami when the Ravens thrashed the Bills 47-3. Just another field goal, 53, and that would have been a unique score. Panthers also 16-8 over the Cowboys. Only one prior game has finished with that score in NFL history. That was a Giants-Cardinals game back in the 90s. So obviously not something that's, really a major story, but it's a fun thing to look out for. It's a fun thing to watch. You can follow Scorigami on Twitter to get updates during NFL Sunday. So, you can be following if something's close. It's just fun. And it's really fun if you want to watch. I would definitely recommend his video on Scorigami or this full chart of all the NFL scores that have ever happened. You can look at every NFL game score on one chart, see how many times it's happened, see what scores are possible, what has happened, what has not happened yet. And I left the link for that as well. So those were some of our top stories for week one. As we move on to the second portion of this show, we're going to look at some of my predictions from last week. Oh, actually, we're not. We're going to do the power rankings a little out of order. We're going to go to those predictions coming up after the power rankings. But once again, we saw all 32 teams play their first games. So what do I think about their performances? How will I change them up? Who do I think is the best team in the league right now? Time to find out on power rankings. So I will be showing you every team in the league, the result of their last game and how far they went up or down, or if they stayed the same. Just as last week, we're going to do this in quartile, starting off with 25 from 32. Starting at the bottom, going up. The Buffalo Bills, Arizona Cardinals, Indianapolis Colts, Miami Dolphins, Cleveland Browns, Oakland Raiders, and then our two teams that just got humiliated, the Detroit Lions and the Tennessee Titans, both moving down 11 spots, which is the most of any team going up or down. I believe actually the Bucs might have tied that 11. We'll find out on the next slide. But yeah, so here are the bottom 8 teams in the league for me. What I want to stress about these power rankings, Bucs number 1. Yeah. I mean, what a performance, and I'll talk about it more in a second. And yeah, the Bills, this was the only way it could end up. The Bills for me, entering week 1 was either 31 or 32 along with those Dolphins. I slotted them at 31. After this performance, I think it's safe to say they can only be put at 32. Just embarrassing. Again, the 47-3 defeat against the Ravens. Nathan Peterman getting the start there over the rookie Josh Allen. I believe he went about 5 for 18 for 25 yards and 2 picks before he was pulled from that game in the third quarter, trailing by 38 points. So another forgettable, not really forgettable, it's kind of unforgettable at this point to see how poor the start to Nathan Peterman's career has been. He has been benched in favor of Josh Allen for week 2, and a good thing because that matchup is against the Chargers, the team Peterman threw 5 picks against in the first half last season. So I think the Bills are going to be probably the worst team in the league for most, if not all of this season. Next year, they're going to have a boatload of cap space, way more than any other team in the league. So this is definitely a full rebuild season. They're expecting to struggle. I think everyone thought they would do a little better than this, but definitely expected to struggle. But what I want to stress out about many of these teams on this list is it's just week 1. So you may see me, have some teams making big gains or big drops, or not as big of a gain or not as big of a drop as you might have expected, depending on the team. And it's really, again, with 1 week of sample size, these power rankings are still completely out of form. It'll take us really about a month to get a really solid list of how we can evaluate these teams. And from then on, there won't be too much movement week to week. But, as we go through these first couple weeks of the season, I just want to stress that things are subject to a ton of movement. If you had to ask me right now, will the Lions finish number 26 by the end of the season? My answer would be no. I think they'll do much better. The Titans, I'm not sure because of some of the injury stuff. But I think the Lions will be a lot better. But this is really just, they wet the bed this week. They started off with the pick 6 against Sam Darnold. I'll talk about Sam Darnold in just a second. But after that, couldn't get anything going. Stafford looked awful. He was getting crushed, for most of that game, throwing tons of interceptions. A lot of interceptions from a lot of big-name quarterbacks was a theme this week. Ben Roethlisberger, another one. A lot of quarterbacks throwing multiple interceptions. Are the power rankings for the week or an ongoing prediction of what the end of year will be? So For me, looking at the power rankings, this is, I kind of answered this question already with the Lions. This is kind of my confidence meter for a team playing this week. So if I were to, pick a team next week to win, here's what I think it would be. So, that'll lead us to situations where if the Packers do start at, 10-2 or something crazy and Aaron Rodgers goes down, the Packers might fall towards the middle of the power rankings just because I don't really have any confidence in them. And we saw that when Derek Carr went out late in 2016. They were like 11-4 or something at that time, but they dropped towards the middle of the rankings and below all the other playoff teams because I would not have favored them in any playoff matchup. Just no matter if they had the 1 seed or the 6 seed or whatever. I wouldn't have picked them to win without Derek Carr. So for me, this is how good do I think these teams are right now? And maybe when the situations are close, because there are a lot of close situations between teams, I will look at, since it is early in the season, I will consider, I'll put some value in their last season's performance kind of as that tiebreaker. How good do I know they were last year? Because, a lot of these teams are largely the same players. Not the Raiders, changing out more than half the roster from last season to this season, which is pretty crazy. But, I will, look at some results from last season or, how good I do think they will project to be in these close spots. But for the most part, it's how good I think they are right now. So the Bills, I think, terrible. Cardinals really struggled, and that was one of the things I called. I did not think they were going to be near as good as people thought last week, and people didn't even think they were going to be that good. And that prediction was validated by that 24-6 loss to the Redskins. Looking at the Colts, lost a game at home to a team that's not that great. Andrew Luck looked pretty good, but again, the lack of anyone really around him is going to be the problem for the Colts this season, as I hit on last week. The Dolphins, again, there were a lot of extra variables in that Dolphins matchup, playing at home, all the weather delays, all the injuries to the Titans. So, good for them getting a win. I still think they're going to be towards the bottom for most of the season. And the Browns, this game didn't really change my opinion too much on the Browns. Even the last couple of years, there were a team that had potential, not playoff potential, but, potential to win a handful of games, 5-6 games, both those seasons, but just blowing it in key situations. And we saw that again, good comeback in the fourth quarter, but missing out on, a bunch of opportunities in overtime. Raiders, again, not looking too good on Monday night, and the Titans and the Lions getting blown out, sending them way down the list as we move on to teams 24 through 17. And I'll let you take a look at those. So again, Bengals, Seahawks, Giants, Niners, Jets, Bucks, Cowboys, and Redskins, 3 teams from the NFC East. And right at the bottom there, you see the Bengals. They beat the Colts. No change for them in the power rankings. Don't really have any more confidence in them to beat this next tier of teams. As you can see, moving down one spot each, the Niners, Giants, and Seahawks. Again, these teams all lost to, at the very least, decent to good teams. In close games. So I didn't really see any reason to really separate those 3 from the group they were in, and I did not think the Bengals were good enough to overtake them. However, who I did think was good enough to overtake them, the Bucks and the Jets. These 2 teams started out in my bottom 5, and we're going to go straight to the Bucks, 48-40. I mean, you've got to be kidding me. This was a team I thought would score 13 points in this game. Jameis Winston obviously out for the first 3 weeks. But maybe Fitzpatrick could be taking his starting spot. Over 450 yards, 5 touchdowns. I mean, the Bucs scored a touchdown, it felt like, on every possession of this game. And as someone that picked the Saints and is trying to, rack up those pick-em wins, it was pretty annoying. Luckily, Drew Brees is my fantasy quarterback. Might have just been the only other quarterback that could put up a game as well as Fitzpatrick did. Drew Brees himself going over 400 yards, 3 touchdowns. But Ryan Fitzpatrick is an interesting player, a journeyman 35-year-old quarterback. And he's put in a couple of these hero games. It feels like in every stop he's been in. We've seen a few of these crazy performances in Houston and in New York. So we know he's capable of this. The consistency usually hasn't been there, and he's never really been on a great team around him, besides that point. But this is an incredible performance from him, and even more so against the Saints in New Orleans against the Saints. And the Saints were a surprise because for most of the last 5 or 6 years or so, the Saints have been one of the absolute worst defenses in the NFL. And despite Drew Brees, slinging it like he always does, they've been a team that finishes 6-7 wins, and they'd missed the playoffs in I think 3 or 4 consecutive seasons before last season, where the defense really stepped it up, and Drew Brees got the help through the I've completely lost my train of thought there. Through, what was I even talking about? Goodness gracious. Sorry, I got a message and I completely lost my train of thought. All right, these Saints, so the 2 running backs, Alvin Kamara and Ingram. So, Drew Brees got a ton of help, and the defense was much better. That was a top 5 defense last season. And for Fitzpatrick to put up 48 against a top 5 defense, only further cements what an incredible performance that was. And now moving on to the Jets, another team that had a great defensive performance, with the pick 6, forcing all the turnovers, making things a little easier on their rookie quarterback. But I do want to talk about Sam Darnold, because this was as rough of a start to an NFL career as you can possibly have. And it's funny seeing these hyped up quarterbacks throw pick 6s, on their first ever NFL pass. We saw Jameis Winston actually do it a few years ago. And Sam Darnold here put in the exact same situation and throws a pick 6 on the first pass, and 7-0 Lions just like that on the road. The Jets, a team that was already supposed to not have too much of a chance to win that game. But what I really loved from him was, his ability to stay level-headed. And that's the thing. Quarterbacks, you have to have a short memory. You're going to make mistakes. It happens against these defenses, but you have to, find ways to work through that. And it's just take it every down, every series at a time. And I really love the way he was able to bounce back. The numbers didn't blow anybody out of the water, his final stats. I believe it was, something along the lines of 15 of 20 for maybe $150 to 200 and 2 scores to go along with that interception. Because a lot of the work came through the defensive side, also got a lot of help running the ball. This is a game, I believe the Jets only outgained the Lions by 10 total yards, and the Jets still managed to win by 30 points. But, a really solid start from Sam Darnold, and the way he was able to cope after that first interception and go on to have a really solid game. Again, nothing that'll blow you out of the water, but especially I want to point out he threw an absolute dot into the corner of the end zone, tightly guarded coverage in the back corner of the end zone late in that first half, threw about a 35, 40-yard touchdown pass, and it was absolutely beautiful. And, tough to really make sample size out of one play. But those are the kind of things you're expecting from Sam Darnold. And you saw him really, really look impressive at times in that game. And then Redskins, Cowboys, Redskins again, Adrian Peterson, strong performance. Really, Alex Smith looking great as well in his first performance. And the Cowboys not doing too much, losing just 16-8 as we head into the top half of the power rankings. And 9 through 16, there you go. I'll let you read them. I'm not going to read them every single time. But right here at the top, we get the Panthers that did have that 16-8 victory against the Cowboys. It was an ugly game. Panthers held that, 16-point advantage for what felt like most of the game. The Cowboys scored and got the 2-point conversion in the middle of the fourth quarter. Maybe to make things a little competitive down the stretch, but really the defense too good. But the main takeaway from that game from the Panthers, as I already said, the Greg Olsen injury. So it will be a little more difficult offensively for them moving forward. However, still, you have to like what you saw in that first game. Saints moving down 5 spots, Steelers moving down 3 spots. I mean, maybe you would have expected them to drop a little further based on their results. The Saints losing at home to a Buccaneers team that we did not think was going to be any good, and the Steelers only tying the Browns. But when I really looked at it, I couldn't really move them down any further. First of all, you don't want to put too much stock in one game, as I already said. And there are some other factors in play. The Saints' offense still looked great. The Steelers performed. I mean, they didn't have Le'Veon Bell, of course. We saw James Conner play well. And Ben Roethlisberger, we'll have to see with him getting injured and getting older, if he's able to still perform. But, we did see some good things from both of those teams. And really, when I looked at all the games, when I was watching all the games week one, one of my main takeaways was I did not see 12 NFL playoff teams. That first week, I saw a handful. I saw maybe 5 or 6 teams that really looked like they had it together and were ready for week one. So we see a team like the Texans lost a game to the Patriots. Deshaun Watson's return was not as glorious as advertised. We saw the Ravens, of course, with that huge performance over the Bills. How much of that is, the Ravens, but how much of that is, they played the Bills? That's something we're going to have to find out. Chargers, it feels like, are always disappointing their fans, if they have any fans left after moving and all the terrible decisions in the management. Bears in a loss still moved them up 3. Loved what I saw out of them for most of the game. And if they can do that, in Green Bay, I think it sets up nicely for the rest of their season to perhaps, finish with a winning record and try to get themselves into playoff contention. And then the Broncos win over the Seahawks. Again, that's what I'm saying. The Ravens, I think it's definitely fair to put them at 13. But when you look at any team that wins a game 47-3, they're up 38-0 first couple of minutes of the second half. How much can you really put in that game? Because any reasonable football team is not going to get beat that badly. But you saw Nathan Peterman, 25 yards. He's not an NFL quarterback. So the Ravens just got to have a field day, and I'm happy for them. I have the defense in fantasy, and I won this week. But I'm going to have to see them do it against another team. A few more teams. Again, even this week, they're playing the Bengals. Even if they have a great game against the Bengals, how much stock are you going to put in that? It's just 2 weeks. It's just the Bills and the Bengals, and they're both going to be in the bottom quarter next week of the power rankings, barring, well, really, if the Bengals lose. So we're going to have to – the Ravens are unproven for me at this point. Chargers, also a bit of a fluke, like you said. They dropped – what was the stat? Like 150 yards in passes, which was the most in the NFL by a long shot. Phillip Rivers, you just feel bad for him. He just slings it. He's crazy. That's what he does, but he's never getting a ring. They've never been able to have anyone around him. And it's mainly been the Phillip Rivers show. And they just get into a lot of these games where he can just throw up touchdowns, but, also some turnovers with him as well. And this Chargers, again, another just underwhelming team, it feels like, for as long as I can really remember. So these teams, a lot of positives, a lot of negatives in some of these teams. Really, I don't think too many of them blew my socks off in this whole group. The Ravens, the only one that I think had a great performance. But, we'll see these teams get better as the season progresses. As we head into the top quarter, my top 4 remain unchanged: Eagles, Patriots, Rams, and Vikings. Now, I will be honest, the Rams and the Vikings to me looked much better than the Eagles and the Patriots. However, they also played much easier opponents. And the Eagles and the Patriots, while it didn't look pretty at times, and the Eagles really, wouldn't have won that game if the Falcons knew how to convert in the red zone, which has been a major problem for them with all the, we all know Julio Jones, one passing touchdown last season, or one receiving touchdown, and just all the struggles. It was a very similar game to their playoff game against the Eagles last season, where they could not convert, losing a low-scoring affair. And the Patriots getting things done against the Texans as well in less than spectacular fashion, but still pretty solid. So even though the Rams and the Vikings to me might have looked a little better, no real sense in moving any of these teams. They all won. We're going to have to get some more data on these teams. I still agree with you that the Rams have a good chance at being the best team in the NFL at the end of the season. It's crazy watching the Rams. just how many studs they have. There are guys all over that you forget the Rams have, and then they show up, and you think this team is just crazy stacked. I was watching the Rams game. All of a sudden, Brandon Cook starts hauling in receptions, and I'm thinking to myself, Brandon Cooks, he's there too? Just names all over the board. It's pretty ridiculous. A lot of youth with that team is the main thing. But definitely in a position to make a run at a Super Bowl, I think. Despite the fact that I think the NFC is much better than the AFC. Other teams on this list, Vikings taking the spot of the Saints. The Jaguars taking that spot of the Saints. Really loved what I saw from the Chiefs this season, or in their opening week matchup against the Chargers. And Tyreek Hill, is he just the most dynamic player we've ever seen, or what? This guy is ridiculous. Once again, wastes no time making all of our jaws drop. Over 200 total yards, maybe even close to 300. I don't have the final tallies. Punt return touchdown, 2 receiving touchdowns. Dude's just lightning quick. They don't call him the cheetah for nothing. And he gets past you and he's off to the races. You have no chance of stopping Tyreek Hill. And that is a perfect weapon for a young quarterback like Pat Mahomes. It's real easy to look good when you've got guys like Tyreek Hill. And then you also, their running backs, kind of a slow start for their running backs this season, but they have Kareem Hunt, they have Spencer Ware, they have tons of pieces. They did lose, what's the name of the cornerback? Oh my goodness. That did also found his way on the Rams this season. Marcus Peters. So the Rams stealing everybody. That's another guy. I was like, wow, Marcus Peters too. It's crazy. But they still have, Eric Berry when hopefully he gets back on the field. And they still got a solid defense. So like the Chiefs, Falcons, Packers, I don't know how I feel really about the Packers. They're kind of lucky they won the game. Part of it's just Aaron Rodgers is Aaron Rodgers. But, for most of the game, they looked pretty bad. But we're able to make that big comeback, so it really prevents me from really moving them any higher. But that's a look at the final power rankings. So top 4 unchanged. A lot of small movements, a few big movements with those Bucks and Jets and Redskins going up, and the Titans and Lions going way down. But especially, in this middle half, I would expect to see, especially from, we'll say, those Ravens at 13, that Texans-Ravens area, all the way down to the Titans-Lions, that middle half. I would expect to see a lot of fluctuation, especially in those parts over the next few weeks. So moving on, we're going to get into my Week 2 predictions in just a few moments. But before that, we're going to look back at some of my best and some of my worst from last week. But of course, we have to go back for that. All right, so my best predictions of last week. We're going to start off with that Packers-Bears game. If you saw the preview I recorded for this show yesterday, you already know about this prediction. It was pretty crazy. I don't really know what I was thinking at the time, but man, did it turn out to be right on the ball. Packers 27-24, I said, but even more than that, I said Rodgers would probably have about 12 yards at halftime and finish at 300 by the end of the game. I did not account Aaron Rodgers getting injured, but still 24-23, or I said 27-23, if I can correct that. And it was 24-23, so nearly nailed the final score. And Rodgers with just 13 yards at halftime, finishing with 286. Again, basically hitting those 12 and 300 numbers. I was pretty surprised at that. Even myself, I was looking back at the stats that Packers game, and I realized, I was like, didn't I make a crazy prediction about Aaron Rodgers just going off in the second half after doing nothing in the first half? And I looked back, and yes, I did, so I'll take credit for it. My next good prediction, I said Adrian Peterson would have a big game against the former team, and that the Redskins would have a dominant performance over those Cardinals, and that also proved to be true with 166 total yards and a touchdown for all day in his 24-6 win for the team. I said the Panthers would beat the Cowboys in an ugly one, 16-13. It was an ugly one, all right, 16-8, and also nearly nailing that game score with the Steelers-Browns, 23-21, and it ended as a 21-21 tie. But for all the good, there also has to be some bad. And of course, I've already talked about these performances from the Lions and the Saints, but just to hit on them one more time. Lions, I had them as my survival football pick of the week. You can only pick one team each week, or each team once per season, and you got to stick with it. And if they lose, you're out. So that was a quick year for me in the survival pool, picking the Lions as they get embarrassed by 31 points at home. And then also, I had the Saints covering a 9.5-point spread with a 28-13 victory that I thought, again, should have been a pretty easy one. But of course, we saw some Fitz magic and perfect passer rating. I mean, come on. How's that happen? How do you let that happen? 48-40 win for the Bucs. Bucs putting up 5 full touchdowns more than I thought they would. So that was some of the good and some of the bad. Now as we come into our final segment, my week 2 predictions. If you're keeping track, last week, of course, disregarding that Browns game, I went 11-4 straight up. And then against the spread, 9-6. The Seahawks-Broncos game ended up being a push. It was a 3-point line, and the Broncos won that one by 3. So pretty happy with my predictions from the first week. A good start to the season. We're going to look to build on it here in week 2. So let's get straight into it. First game, Thursday night, Bengals at home hosting the Ravens. Bengals actually drawing a 1-point favorite in this matchup. This is another one I feel is going to be a close one. Both these teams picking up victories, Bengals against the Colts and Ravens against the Bills. So not the greatest of opponents, but it should be a good game. I think the Ravens are going to have another strong defensive performance. Maybe I just want it from my fantasy team, but I do think they'll have another strong game. And my call for this one is going to be Ravens 23, Bengals 16, and I still do not know what's up with these glitches. But I'm going to go with you, Ravens, to pick up a second win in week 2. Pick Bengals. Interesting. I mean, again, I could see this one going both ways. I don't think, Brian, I'm as sold as you are on the Ravens are a total mirage here. That, they're just going to disappear in week 2 or anytime they're not playing the Bills. I'm going to put a little more faith into them, see how it rides. I've got the Ravens in this one, but Bengals is a completely acceptable pick. Panthers, Falcons losing the first one to the Eagles. They are at home. Still 6 points to me feels a bit much on that line, which is why I'm going to take the Falcons in the game, but not to cover. 27-24. I'd like to see both these teams get their offenses going a little more. I think they will do so. I think both these teams kind of struggled a bit in week 1, but as they piece things together, these should be pretty good offenses. So I like the Falcons 27-24 as we head into our third game, Chargers against the Bills. We're going to waste no time. Oh, yeah, big win for the Chargers. Josh Allen gets the start for the Bills. Do I think it'll make too much of a difference? Not particularly. 7.5-point spread, and I've doubled it to 15 in my prediction. Panthers with the points, I agree. Yeah, I agree. So a 15-point win for the Chargers, there's my prediction. And, we can debate on final scores, maybe a bit even on the spread. Maybe someone will say something like 2013 or 2014, but I think I'm pretty confident taking the Chargers and giving the Bills 7.5. So our next game, Vikings-Packers. Now this is going to be a good one. Real excited for this one to see the Vikings and the Packers play. Packers taking on another divisional rival in Minnesota, once again at home. So, a favorable start to the schedule for them, getting opportunities to win big games, especially against, teams they're going to be competing with for the division and the playoffs, Vikings and the Bears. But in this one, I'm going to take the Vikings in the upset. Again, I'm not super sold on that huge Aaron Rodgers performance. I know he has clutch performances. That's something he does. But for the most part, the Packers did not look strong in that game. I think the Bears' youth kind of wilted their performance a bit. And I'm going to take the Vikings here. Packers favored by 1. I'm going to give the Vikings by 3. This is a good point Rodgers usually does not lose at home. I believe I saw a stat prior to their game against the Bears that Aaron Rodgers, he went something like 8-8, I believe the stat was, in his first 16 starts at home, but since is 50-8, and now it would be 51-8. So Aaron Rodgers with a great track record, but I'm going to go against it in this one. I think the Vikings got a great defense, and I did not really love what I saw out of the Packers for most of that game, and I don't think that's a crazy thing to say at all. Browns and the Saints. This is an interesting one, just for the sole purpose that the Saints are still getting 8.5 against the Browns, despite giving up 48 points. And the Browns, showing some signs of life against the Steelers. I still think you'd be crazy to pick the Browns, considering how good the Saints were supposed to be and how good their offense still was in the first week of the season. But with that 8.5 points, I'm going to take the Browns against the spread. 27-21 is going to be my call on this one. I expect the Saints to have another strong offensive performance, but I mean, really, 48 points, and we know they're going to be better on defense because God knows the Browns are dropping 48 points. But Saints straight up and Browns against the spread. The Browns are going to play in a lot of close games this season. They're going to surprise some people every now and again. And I still think this is a team that can win, 6 or 7 games. I don't think it's going to be this one. This is a pretty bad matchup for them, in my opinion. Dolphins-Jets coming up in Game 6. One of these teams is going to be 2-0, and that is not something I would have guessed at the last week. Not at all. These were two teams I thought were going to lose pretty definitively. However, both picking up the wins. The difference for me, I think, was the quality of the win. The Jets on the road against the Lions, blowing them out of the water. The Dolphins, that game with all the rain delays. And it might sound like I'm using the rain delays as some form of an excuse, but that's really not the case, because when we came back from the second rain delay in that game, it was 7-3 late in the third quarter, like 2 minutes left in the third quarter, and the game finished 27-20. If that tells you anything, after the couple rain delays, they've already been there for 5 or 6 hours. Guys are in the locker rooms, having snacks, watching other NFL games. It's tough to keep the composure. It's tough to keep that energy, and it really favors the offense. And we saw those offensive explosions. So you kind of, have to take everything you saw in that fourth quarter with a grain of salt, because both of those teams in that game looked like they were amazing on offense in the fourth quarter, when it really was, it's really not the case for either one of these teams. So I think in my preview of this game, I've already kind of made the prediction, 2-0, Jets, 20-16, and maybe even could win that game by a few more points. But even giving the 3 to the Dolphins, I'm liking Miami. Chiefs-Steelers, another surprising line for me. Maybe it's because it's early in the week that we haven't seen a lot of movement yet in these lines. But to see the Steelers favored by 4 after last week, a bit of a surprise for me. I'm taking the upset in this case. I'm going Chiefs 28-23. I'm, really looking forward to seeing Pat Mahomes once again, to see all those dynamic weapons Kansas City has. And I think they're going to be able to get this one over on the Steelers. Once again, just waiting for Le'Veon Bell. Eagles-Bucks. Bucks with a great first week of the season. But how will that transition to a Week 2 matchup against the defending Super Bowl champions? I think not well. I think they're going to keep this one relatively close. I'm actually calling for a lot of points. I have fell for the Fitzmagic. 30-26, Eagles just barely squeezing it in over that 3.5. But yeah, I think this is going to be a bit of a return to form for the Eagles. I think they kind of have to be much better, get more acclimated, run with Nick Foles. And this is what we're looking at. Like, what is this on the screen? But yeah, 30-26, Eagles over the Bucks will be my call for this one. Yeah, and strange lines, Brian, I agree. Really a lot of strange lines, and we'll see them update probably, get a little more reasonable. But if you can put your money on them now, I think there's some money to be made definitely this week on a lot of these lines. Another one for me, Texans at the Titans. Mariota's not going to be 100%. Again, the tight end Delaney Walker, they won't have Luan. Just banged up, a really exhausting first week of the season for the new coach, Mike Vrabel. And the Texans, I think, will be looking to explode here against the Titans. I'm not predicting a massive explosion from Houston, but I think they will comfortably pick up their first win of the season, and I like them by 10. 27-17 for my first pick of the second half of the slate. Once again, now we're on that right side of the screen, filling in the matchups as we go. And hopefully, as you can look back on those earlier picks, if maybe you missed part of the show, hopefully the font has been made a little larger this week. So hopefully it's a little less blurry, especially for you guys watching on mobile. Colts Redskins here, 6-point advantage for the Redskins. I'm going to go straight towards the pick. I'm going 2016. I think this will be a game, I'm taking the Colts against the spread. Not a lot of points I'm feeling in this one. And I could obviously be proven wrong. But for me, I think the Colts are just going to lose a lot of close games this season. I think that's going to be the main thing for them. And, 16 points. I think Andrew Luck will, we'll see how he develops. I still think he's going to finish as one of the better quarterbacks, as I said last week, in the league this season. Let me just read through a few of the comments. Texans easy pick. Too many road favorites. Maybe I'm choosing too many. I don't think I've made any really unrealistic picks, though. Maybe I am taking a lot of road teams. And in fact, I know I have been. But, if there's anything that's been way out of the park, feel free to let me know. But I don't really think it's the case. And, Colts, heck of a snowboarder, Andrew Luck. Following reports, they just had a lingering injury for the last 3 years or something insane from a snowboarding accident or snowboarding injury of some form. I'm sure he'll be avoiding the snow for a while because he's been injured for as long as we can remember at this point. And even when he's been playing, there have always been talks about how's the shoulder doing or whatnot. So taking the Skins here. Cardinals Rams. Now this is a big line for a week 2 matchup. This is a really big line. And if you think about it, it's kind of reasonable. This is a home game against what could be the best team in the league versus the worst team in the NFC. Could easily be the best team in the NFC versus the worst in the NFC. 13 points still for me feels a bit much. So even though I expect the Rams to win this with ease, I'm going to have them winning by just 11 points, 28-17. And this is a game for me. Could the Rams win this game 40-7? Absolutely. But do I think they're going to win by 40-7, more than half the time? No, I think there's going to be a lot of just comfortable wins where maybe the Rams are up, 2 or 3 scores for most of the game, and the Cardinals get something in garbage time and get it a little closer. This is one, even with a line this big, Brian, I think this is one where you still could take the Rams. It's interesting because usually when you see a line this big, you have to think about it. You have to think about it a couple of times before you're taking the team favored by 2 touchdowns. But could have went either way on this one. I'm thinking that it'll be a little closer, and I'm gonna take the Rams, but the Cardinals giving them 13 points, I think it's just a bit too much for me. Lions and 49ers now. As we get into these last 5 picks of the show. Another big line. 49, and I know the Lions look bad. I've talked about how bad the Lions looked. But the 49ers didn't look great either. And to be favored by 6, again, this is another line to me that I think is a little crazy. I give them 3 or 4, at most. but 6. So I'll give the Niners the win, but I will not give them a win by 6 points or more. I think it's going to be pretty close. And I'll take the 49ers 26-24. Raiders Broncos, another 6-point line for the home team. This one makes a little more sense. This one I think is, pretty reasonable. The Broncos picking up their first win of the season over Seattle, getting revenge for that Super Bowl game, even though I'm sure only a few players are left from that 2014 roster. Von Miller, not too many others. 24-22, surprise you. I'm going Raiders. I like a bounce-back game from Derek Carr. He looked like a mess for a lot of this one. I think, the Raiders are going to need to get on the board, make something happen. The Broncos, for the last few seasons, have been a team very inconsistent on offense. Very inconsistent. And, I think they're going to have games where they look decent. They didn't exactly look great last week either. But they're going to have games where they look good, and they're going to have games where they flat out don't. And in a divisional matchup where these teams like each other more, or are more familiar with each other than the average team, I think this is one where the Raiders can pull an upset. All right, Patriots, Jaguars. And I know we have some Patriots fans watching right now, so I'm just going to get straight to it and say you're taking a loss. 27-23 is going to be the call. I still think the Patriots are shaped up to easily win the AFC East, easily make the playoffs, probably get a first-round bye, but you have to admit this is the second best team in the AFC on the road in a tough defense. This is somewhat contingent on Leonard Fournette's status for the game. It is somewhat, again, contingent on Leonard Fournette's status. If he is ruled out, I think I'm much more likely to lean Patriots. But this is going to be a real great game. This is the game of the week in my eyes for sure. Be really excited to check this one out. And hey, you can't win every game, Patriots fans. You can't win every game. Come on. If you're going to drop one, this is probably the one you're going to drop. So I'm going to take the Jaguars here. And moving on to Giants, Cowboys. Man, this is going to make me sound so much like a homer now that I'm taking the Giants and picking a Patriots loss. It's kind of funny. No, this is just how I feel about this week. Completely honestly. Last week I picked the Patriots to beat the Texans, and they did, and I picked the Giants to lose, and they did. This week I think it's going to be a little different. And my reasoning for this Giants-Cowboys game, I think the Giants, especially on the offensive side of the ball, have much higher potential than the Cowboys do this season. And we've seen flashes of Saquon Barkley. The Cowboys, the thing is, they're a run-first team, and their offensive line is banged up. And when, they had four Pro Bowlers, and now either injured or moving on, or, there are a lot of questions to be had there. And then when that's your bread and butter, we saw what happens. The Cowboys only scored 8 points, only one scoring drive. The Giants struggled a bit in the red zone last week. They had 3 field goals, and then that big Saquon Barkley run. They were also playing the Jaguars, who might be the best defense in the league. We saw, again, the Giants on paper, this offense should be really good with Saquon Barkley, and then Odell, and then Sterling Shepard and Evan Ingram, a wide receiver and a tight end that are 2 of the best young, weapons in the league. The offensive line still struggled. Eric Flowers was still really bad. A couple early penalties, allowing a sack, allowing 5 pressures. So the offensive line is still the main concern for me with this team. But I'm going to take them over the Cowboys. I think their potential is just so much higher. I think the Cowboys are pretty locked in, and of course, could always be wrong. It's only 1 week. But I feel like the Cowboys are really locked into just being a average to maybe slightly below average team this season, where the Giants, maybe that might be another median prediction, but the potential is so much higher. And you're going to see games where they break some things out. And I think it's going to be very close. Again, that's why I'm only calling it a 1-point game, 2019. But I think the Giants are going to get this one. And then in my final pick of the week, Seattle taking on the Bears. And we're giving this one to the Bears, 23-17. Seahawks, another team with a poor offensive line. I think the Bears are going to be looking to take advantage of that the way they did for most of that game against the Packers. This Bears team is good. I like these Bears a lot, and I think it is unfair to criticize the Bears or move them down in the rankings, because I do see some people moving them down in the rankings for last week's performance. Again, if you are not told the details of that game and you say, the Bears were leading in the last minute of that game and then Aaron Rodgers happened, I think you take it. And the Seahawks are not going to be a great team. If we scroll back to my power rankings, wherever that is, this is a much longer scroll than I anticipated. Oh, boy. And, oh, boy. Okay, so here we go. So the Seahawks at 23. Not a team I think is great. I had the Bears much higher at 15. And despite, Seattle, actually, and the Bears are home in this game. So, yeah.